For it to start recording on Facebook, and then I'll click record here.
Okay.
All right. All right, I'll start the recording here. All right, well, welcome everyone. I don't really have a regular show, so I have nobody really to impress with my introduction here. So I will just, for those who are interested in watching this, I mean, some of the work that I do with the church is the promotion of the traditional Latin Mass. I've been doing that for about 15 years since my first Latin Mass back in 2005. For those who are Catholic and know what's going on in the church today, some would probably say, you know, there's probably bigger fish to fry in terms of the scandals in the Catholic Church and things like that. But for whatever reason, Pope Francis has set his sights on the traditionalists of the you know, those who are attached to the traditional Latin Mass. So I just want to go into a little bit to an introduction here. I will be interviewing Dr. Fidel Arnecillo. He's the pastor of Symposia Covenant Church in Ontario. Those who know me on Facebook, I've been sort of promoting our Galatians Bible study for about 12 weeks so far, and we've had other programs related to Catholicism and you know, Protestant questions to Catholicism. And now, well, last week we spoke about where we had a discussion about the deconversion stories of evangelicals and sort of what is maybe a Catholic perspective. At least that's what I brought to the table, right? What are some perspectives on those deconversions, and what could we do to maybe, if anything, maybe try to bring them back? So this is my attempt of something on my end, which is, you know, several times I've mentioned the Latin Mass in our programs, and it sounded like Dr. Arnecillo was intrigued by what this Latin Mass is about. So we'll get into the details of that in my questions, but would you like to say anything further to introduce yourself?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So, thank you. Thank you for being here to answer my questions. I just want to give a little bit of background about the Latin Mass. So there's different names to the Latin Mass. For those who are aware, it's called the traditional Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass, because it was codified at the Council of Trent in 1570, or at least shortly after that, by a papal bull, quote primum, by Pius V. It's also called the 1962 Missal, the Usus Antiquior, and more recently, Pope Benedict XVI in 2007, he came out with a document called Summarum Pontificum, where he referred to this Mass as the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite, in contrast with the Mass that came out of Vatican II, or at least came after Vatican II, called the Novus Ordo Mass. He started calling that the ordinary form of the Roman Rite. But recently, that freeing of the use of that Latin Mass has been attempted to be quashed by our current Pope, Holy Father Francis. He came out with a document called Traditionis Custodes, where he at least attempted to severely restrict the use of this Mass, because he wants all Catholics to eventually move towards the new Mass. And all of the controversy around that's all politics within the Catholic Church, so I won't bore anyone about that. So I wanted to ask Dr. Arnecillo, because he actually went to a solemn high Mass that we had at San Segundo de Asti in Ontario a few weeks ago, and I just wanted to capture some of his, you know, first impressions about what he thought, because obviously it's a different perspective from a Catholic who understands the Catholic Mass, but is only familiar with the Novus Ordo. And of course, they're going to be confused, like, what's all this Latin? What's all this? Why is the priest not facing me? All this other stuff. But that's a Catholic perspective. I'd like to maybe capture what a Protestant perspective would be of the same things that probably confuses Novus Ordo Catholics who don't know anything about the Latin Mass. So if I may, I have a couple of questions. My first question is, can you share your background and experience with Catholic forms of liturgy and worship?
Okay. I was born and raised in the Philippines. So that means that I must have been exposed to Catholicism, right? Considering that it's predominantly Roman Catholic country. So despite the fact that I was a Protestant, so I have some exposures to the Roman Catholic Church. I attended a high school, St. Francis School, in Cavite. So it's a Catholic high school and elementary school. But I only went there for high school. So I attended, the retreats. I attended some of the chapel services. And I probably even took communion, right? Even though I was not supposed to, but that's probably a no-no, right? But so you didn't hear that, right? I was a kid, right? I was like, I don't know, like 16 or 15 when I was in line, and then they gave me the thing, the bread and the wine, okay, and I even sang for the Roman Catholic Church when I was in high school also, even though I was not Catholic. I used to sing, and so I was asked to sing some of those Catholic songs. And I sing when there's like some kind of funeral also. So I sing. So those are my exposures, right? And I also attended like what they call Simbang Gabi in the Philippines, just to hang out with friends when I was a teenager. So those are the only exposures that I have with Catholic liturgy.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, a little bit of a follow-up to that. So you said you were Protestant. You were always Protestant. You were never Catholic. So
Mhm.
so those experiences in the context of post-Vatican II Catholic liturgy, and I don't know if these terms even make any sense to you to say was it liberally oriented, or was it conservatively oriented, because I think there are some nuances that I think you might not be able to have picked up on with those terms, because just small little nuances that I think is even true in like low church versus high church Lutheranism or Anglicanism, right? There's something about, if you were to see a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor processing up to the altar and with his back towards the people, because it's actually, that's the way they do it, with full on vestments, as if so that's like high church, right? So you get the impression there's something conservative about that form of Lutheranism versus the pastor who just comes in with a stole, all white robe, no chasuble, no vestments. There's an impression there that it's more perhaps evangelical, like maybe not even vestments at all, right?
Mhm.
So did you get any impression what kind of theological orientation those churches were at the time?
No, not when I was in high school. I knew they look like, at least from my standpoint, given that I grew up as a Pentecostal, that those are some kind of a high church tradition, right? So even if it might not be that traditional, but it struck me as traditional Catholic masses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there anything appealing about it, or was there something about it that was like, well, that was beautiful, or that was very
Yeah, I remember once I was attracted to become a Catholic when I was in a Catholic retreat, because I think being in a retreat, I don't know what you call that, like a retreat house, is that what they're called? With nuns around, and it's a lot of trees, so it has that kind of certain appeal. I remember even walking near a cross, right, and really contemplating about whether I should become a Catholic. So that means there has to be some kind of an appeal, right? I probably don't find like rosary and those kind of things appealing, but it's more like the solemn aspect of worship, right? I find that to be appealing, given that I grew up as a Pentecostal, where you don't really you don't really find a lot of that solemnity, right, or the quietness, because in Pentecostal churches, it looks like there's a desire for extravagant celebration all the time, right? But you don't find some kind of satisfaction in quietness and simplicity that I think I found in Catholic churches, right? At least when I was at that age, right?
Yeah. There's I think I mentioned this to you before. There is sort of almost an equivalent, and maybe it wasn't true in the regions that you grew up in, where we have this what would they call charismatic Catholic movement, and so that was a result of if I have my facts straight in my mind. A part of the ecumenical kind of efforts, even before Vatican II, where you had Pentecostal Bible scholars or Bible teachers that were having joint Bible studies with Catholics, and so it sort of developed this culture of sort of Pentecostal practices within the Catholic fold, and so you would often find in these prayer meetings, apart from church, apart from Mass, speaking in tongues and sort of minor exorcisms done by the lay people, things like that.
Mhm.
I actually was invited and I participated in one of these things back in the mid 2000s.
Mhm.
I went one time and I never came back because they spoke in tongues. I know a little bit of Latin and I don't speak in tongues. I didn't want to feel left out. So everybody was speaking Hebrew and Greek. And I was like, Pater noster qui es in caeli sanctificatus. I know some Latin prayers. I didn't want to feel left out. It was weird. But and I don't know. I don't question the validity of that because it's just not my thing, and I don't know a lot about that whether it's valid or not, if it's glossolalia or whatever it's going on there. But they also had a minor exorcism there in front of me. Somebody was suffering from some kind of demonic infestation, and so they did it right in front of me. It freaked me out. I was like, I'm not coming back to this thing. I was like, this is a little weird for me. What was interesting to me is a priest actually walked by. And if anybody does exorcisms in the Catholic Church, it's the priest. But nobody said, "Hey, Father, come, let's do this minor." We did it as lay people, and I thought, oh, that seems like it's anyway. It was just a confusing situation for me. So okay, so I'll move on to the second question. Thank you. What were you concerned about, if you were concerned about anything or expecting anything? Before your experience of the traditional Latin Mass, just based on kind of what I was talking about, that it was really different from the Novus Ordo or the New English Mass. Did you have any concerns prior to the attending?
No, I think instead of concerns, I might have some expectations, right? Because I think I expected that I am spiritually mature enough to probably appreciate it. Although I don't think it reached to that point where I really appreciated it. And so it might be, the fault might be on my part, right? But I have certain anticipations and expectations. I was actually expecting to be, to find it appealing. Because I do find it appealing when I listen to Gregorian chants, like on YouTube and stuff like that. So it might be, I don't know, it might just be how it sounded with the one we attended. But I have that expectation, right, that I will be somehow, I will find it appealing. I was not like turned off by it. I don't think I was turned off by it. It was just I don't think I reacted the way I was expecting to react.
Okay. I wasn't expecting that answer. I was expecting, I had a vision of the triune God and the Gregorian chant.
No, and I'm not denying the intellectual appeal of it.
Yeah.
That's why I said it might be the problem is not with the liturgy, but it might be my lack of it might be the problem is on my part. Right, because I think this might be some kind of a taste that you need to cultivate.
Sure.
Right. So for example, when I think of classical music, I think it's you have to cultivate a taste for it. So when I took classical music in college, right, I didn't appreciate it at all because I don't even know anything about classical music. Did I say that there's something wrong with it? I don't think so with the classical music, right? I just think that I'm just not probably exposed enough, right, to even appreciate it, or I don't know much about it to appreciate it. And probably that's the same thing I have there, right? So so if I listen to classical music, I feel like, oh, it's a very intelligent kind of music, right? But I just don't find it appealing. Why? Probably because I am more exposed to more popular kind of music, right? So the same thing with my experience in that high Latin mass, right? I saw it as, yeah, it sounds like I'm listening to classical music, right? I know it is intelligent, but I don't think I have enough exposure to actually appreciate something like that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think in hindsight, now that I'm thinking about it, I couldn't have expected your first reaction to the Latin Mass to be more profound or better than my first reaction to the Latin Mass. Because when I first went to the Latin Mass, because when I heard about it, I said, oh, strange to worship in Latin. Okay. So I found the local Latin Mass chapel that existed. It's in Colton. So I went there, 15, 16 years ago. And I sat there confused, bewildered, whatever term you want to use, to just try to figure, and there was nobody there leading me or telling me, oh, you have to look at this book, you have to be on that page. I was like, they're sitting, standing, kneeling at different times, different from the regular Catholic Mass. Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff, but it's more of that and a lot more kneeling. And you just have to follow what everybody else is doing, because you don't want to look like you're out of the loop or something like that. So that was my first impression, and I didn't like it necessarily the first time I went, or even the first few times I went. So I was just curious what your impressions were. So actually, that's actually the third question. If you have anything more to add about that, is can you maybe summarize your thoughts? I mean, in general, of your reaction to what you did experience, maybe particular things that are, you might have questions about, or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think my reaction, it might be, I don't want it to sound negative here, right? And like what I said, I'm not trying to downplay the aesthetic quality, right, of the High Latin Mass. I just think that people need to have probably enough exposures, right, to acquire a taste for it, right? But my initial reaction is more like, I think very similar to the kind of critique that I will give Catholicism, that I don't necessarily find it wrong. It just happens that I just worry about the necessity of the kind of rituals that are being used. So that was just my reaction. So I don't think it was not a reaction of being turned off. It's just wondering whether there is something necessary about the use of, I don't know, like a dead language, right? Like Latin, right? For a mass. Does it sound beautiful? Yeah, I'm assuming it can sound beautiful to people who have a learned ear, right? That they can appreciate that quickly, and I understand that aesthetic appeal of it. I don't think I'm denying that. I'm just worried about the necessity of that. Why do we have to do it in Latin, right? Why, considering that probably there will be less comprehension, right, on the part of the people on the pews. I hope I'm not criticizing here, because I do sound like that next time. I'm a philosopher by nature, and then I have that tendency to sound like I'm criticizing. Like I said, I don't want to downplay the aesthetic value of it, because I do understand why people find it to be appealing, right? I just don't think I have a trained ear or a trained mind, right, for that kind of stuff. And so the whole time I was listening, I think I was more impressed by the simplicity of the architecture of that church that we attended. I think that caught my attention, right? Because as a pastor of Protestant church, I was actually thinking while I was inside, I wish I can pastor a church that looks like this, right? That's what I was thinking, right? But I was not as much thrilled with the Latin part of it. Yeah, because again, one of my main concern is I think is about the necessity of it, and that's pretty much it. I just wondering why do we have to do it this way?
Sure.
I don't know. You could probably answer that question for me.
Sure, yeah, and then we can go on to the another issue other than that, because then I would forget, right? So let me address that issue. So I mean, we have to, and I didn't cover this in the introduction, right? So I know my very meticulous traditionalist friends who are watching this have all of the notes and they've memorized all of the history, so they're going to correct me, but I'm just going to broadly overview, right? So we're talking about a mass. So what you went to, what you saw, was basically essentially the same kind of high mass you would have seen without maybe the vestments changes and things like that over the centuries, but the principal parts of the mass, the structure of the liturgy and prayers go back to the Gregorian reform of Pope St. Gregory in the 5th century. So that mass was codified in the 5th century, and essentially that same liturgy has remained unchanged for 15 centuries. They call it the Tridentine Mass because there was a sort of another reform or a restoration, if you will, during the time of Pope St. Pius V in 1570 with Pro Primum that I mentioned earlier. So there was only minor changes. So we're talking about a culture of Catholics for at least 15 centuries, where if you grew up Catholic, this is what you were socialized with. There was nothing but Latin, right? And so you would have had Latin studies in your schooling throughout, and so you wouldn't come into it like, what's going on here, right? This is the way you've worshipped since the earliest times. And they didn't have microphones back then, and they didn't have microphones until the last century or so, right? So you wouldn't have heard what the priest in the way far front was saying anyway. So he was whispering in Latin, he was all that stuff. What you really would mostly be hearing is the chanting of the choir behind you, right? Those are what's accessible to you. The beauty of the psalms and the antiphons and all those things that are chanted. And it, as far as the Latin is concerned, symbolically, it's like a veil of mystery. I know this sounds like gibberish to you, but from a Catholic ear, there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of veiled mystery kind of things, right? They're not necessarily things that are intended to be explicit and comprehensible, because it requires a bit of effort to acclimate yourself to understanding, right? And so, just like the temple, I mean, the temple in the Old Covenant, right? Only the high priest could go in the temple. Nobody could even enter into the Holy of Holies except for the high priest. So there is that sort of barrier in old religion that sort of continued in the new Christian religion. There was, in the Eastern traditions, you have the Iconostasis. If you ever been to a Eastern like a Orthodox church, even worse, you don't see anything what's going on. They close the little saloon doors, or whatever they're called. Sorry, I'm not trying to be offensive to the Eastern Christians, but I don't know what they're called, but they're like saloon doors. When they do their consecration, which is similar to what Catholics do in consecration, you see nothing. All you see is the iconostasis. And so while the priest is praying the prayers of consecration, doing the hocus pocus stuff, right? I'm just using that as a joke, right? That's actually where it comes from. It's just a tidbit of trivia there. When people say hocus pocus, it's making fun of the mass, because the priest says hoc est enum corpus meum, and they just said, that's all hocus pocus. So the Catholic magic going on behind there. Anyway, that's what's going on behind there. And what are the people doing? It's not that they're just kind of passively, twiddling their thumbs. It's an opportunity for them to meditate, light some candles, pray some prayers in front of some icons, roam around in the Eastern tradition anyway. You don't do that in the Catholic tradition, but in the Eastern tradition, there's an opportunity there to meditate, in a more personal way, while the prayers are being said by the priest offering his sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So I know I said a lot, but essentially that's the function of the Latin. Is it's almost a kind of a veil of mystery where you have to kind of do the work to acclimate yourself to that language, but also it has practical value. I went to the Philippines a few years ago, and I understand Tagalog generally, but what if I didn't? If I was on business, or if I was on a trip somewhere, guess what? I can bring my one missal that's in Latin, and I can go to any Latin mass. And that's what I did when I went to the Philippines. I went to the local Latin mass, and the mass is exactly the same everywhere in the world. You'll have the same prayers, and you could speak Spanish, Portuguese, whatever it is that you speak, Norwegian, and you can pray and worship with other people in that common tongue, that common. I mean, you don't speak it like conversationally, but you can pray with them. Like I go to a Spanish mass sometimes because my schedule permits it. I mean, I missed all the other mass. I don't speak Spanish, but when they're like "Por los siglos de los siglos," I know generally where we are in the mass, and I'll just say it in Latin, to myself. I don't want to distract other people, but I will respond, in the Latin, because I know it. I know the prayers in Latin, so. I don't know. Does that answer your question? I don't know if it's satisfactory.
Yeah, that answered my question. But I think it might that probably reinforces some of my prejudices already, right? So for example, I thought that what Christianity did to biblical faith, right, is the demystification, right, of biblical faith, right? Or I don't know if we can use the word demagification. And then and so what we find in the Roman Catholic Church is an attempt to remystify, right, the biblical faith again, right, or to remagication of it, right? It's making it magical again, right? And magical not in a necessarily positive connotation, right? And not necessarily having positive connotation here. I'm not trying to do a critique here. I think I'm just expressing as transparent as I can, right? My feelings about it, without necessarily undermining its aesthetic value. I don't think I want to undermine that, because I think there is something there, right? But so now it's giving me an idea of how the history of the biblical faith involves, the demystification, remystification, trying to demystify it again with Martin Luther, right, with the attempts of the Protestant reformers. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm even making sense here, but that's seemingly my impression here.
Sure.
Is that why is there a need to remystify it?
Sure.
When the goal supposedly is to demystify it, right? The faith, or is this a kind of natural cycle to religion? I'm not sure, right? Whether that's what really happens to religion, and given its long life, right? That it just goes back in circles. I'm not sure, right? But that's my impression, at least, right?
And do you think, in our program last week, you talked about the evangelical exodus? You didn't use that phrase. I have a book over there that says evangelical exodus, where there has been, at least in the last 30 years, and I know a few of them. Those that were not all of them are evangelical. They could come from Presbyterianism, Calvinism, all sorts of things. But somehow there is this evangelical appeal or this movement towards Catholicism from evangelicals.
Mhm.
And it's not that they're moving, to other evangelical churches or other Protestant churches. They're
Mhm.
specifically moving to the more liturgical churches.
Mhm.
So the ones that are kind of not ready for all the smells and bells, although Anglicanism has the smells and bells, they might stop over in Anglicanism, or they might find their final resting place over in Eastern Orthodoxy or Catholicism.
Mhm.
But somehow it seems like the appeal is not always so much the history. I think that's more of the justification later on. But somehow, somehow they visit a Catholic church, and then they experience a Catholic liturgy, even the Novus Ordo liturgy, and it inspires something, or at least starts something. Do you think there's something about that, the liturgy itself, that might appeal to certain, at least personality styles?
Yeah. Yeah, it might be personality styles, but I do find I'm assuming if the mass that I attended with you was actually in English, it might have a different impact on me. That's my assumption here, right? It might have a different impact on me. It might move me in a different way,
Hmm.
because I remember when I attend English mass, I actually find it to be I'm captivated by it.
Hmm.
I remember attending one in Connecticut when I was living there. I think it's St. Thomas More Catholic Church in Connecticut,
Hmm.
and I was captivated by the liturgy, but the liturgy was actually in English though,
Hmm.
right? So I don't know if the fact that it was in Latin that probably made me um or at least it didn't I was not as captivated as I was when I was in the English mass. That's why I said I was expecting something more, right? On my part, I was expecting more and some kind of an extravagant kind of reaction to it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, I think it might have
um
been different if it was in maybe a different, because you said it was such a simple structure of the church.
mm,
I wonder if it would be different if we went, you heard that same mass in St. Peter's Basilica, for example, or some
yeah,
other,
that probably might yeah, it might have an effect. Yeah, it might have a different effect.
yeah.
But also, I also do think that probably you're right. I think personality has a lot to do with it too,
Mm,
right? In determining, which style of worship we probably prefer.
mhm.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, now that I think about it, because I remember when I said, okay, we should go to a Latin mass, but then I thought, well, maybe I should take you to the Anglican Ordinariate mass that's in Murrieta. I think you remember I mentioned that.
Yeah.
It's the priest there is a convert from Anglicanism, and I
Mhm.
think he has his roots in Southern Baptist roots or something like that. So that might already turn you off. I don't know, but
No.
uh, but uh, anyway, he's an incredible church planter, if you want to use that phrase, because he literally he converted, I think, what, 8-9 years ago, something. I went to his ordination mass because he was an ordained Anglican priest. But in a Catholic perspective, Anglicans are not true priests. They're not ordained in the tradition,
Mhm.
in the right tradition. So they have to be ordained as a Catholic. And he's married. He's got kids. So anyway, and then he started planting Anglican Catholic churches. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's Anglican tradition, but truly fully Catholic churches. So he started off with St. John Newman in Irvine, and then he opened one, Our Lady of Grace in Covina, and then Holy Martyrs in Murrieta. And so he started all three of those, and they're all flourishing now. And now they need to find a no property. In the course of 2 years, he's already outgrown his. It was a former 24-hour fitness center.
Mhm.
Anyway, what they have there is basically the mass that you saw in Old English, these and thous, and with thy spirit, and thine is the kingdom, things like that, right? But it's English. It's beautiful English, right?
Yeah.
So it's comprehensible. It's the chanting is sometimes in English, but a lot of it is Gregorian chant or polyphony. So it still has that beauty in terms of the music, and it has the incense, has all the smells and bells. The vestments are similar, but it's in English. So maybe I should have brought you there. But anyway, I didn't want to lose the opportunity. I was like, oh, you're close to Ontario. They're having one. If you're open, you're open.
Yeah.
So,
I hope I'm not sounding critical here.
no, I appreciate it. And you know what? My if anybody's my traditionalist friends, they probably already stopped watching, but that's fine. This is for because it's a sensitive subject for traditionalists because they love the Latin Mass and they can't. I mean, being a psychology professor, I understand the personality aspect of this, right? There's a certain personality that's attracted to that kind of liturgy, and there's the vast majority are well, I shouldn't say complacent, but they are more comfortable with the English common liturgy, and not the Anglican version, but the ones that they could just come in their shorts and sandals and they're fine because they're comfortable. It's been that way for 40 years. So it's hard to break away from that. But the fact of the matter is longevity in terms of long-term Catholicism is that these groups of the ones that go to the Latin Mass are the ones that the communities are actually growing and not losing members. There's more vocations to the priesthood coming from those groups rather than the common ones. So the writing is on the wall. There seems to be this cultural shift towards that magification, to use that term. I think that's what you said earlier. There's an attraction to it for some odd reason. I wonder what that is. I have some suspicions. It's because we've become so materialistic and worldly over the last few decades that to pause and just even silence in our day-to-day is so rare that when they find this liturgy that has so much silence in it, there's something there that seems to be missing in some of these people's lives. I don't know. I don't know if that's really the answer, but
no, honestly, I enjoyed it when I attended some Anglican churches in the past, and I truly enjoy it. Right, even Protestant churches that are strongly like liturgical in nature. Right, I really enjoyed those kind of things. So I am assuming the common denominator is that all the liturgies that I ended up liking in the past, the Catholic, the Lutheran, the Anglican, are actually all in English. So I might have appreciated it more, right, if I attended like some kind of an anglicized, right, a Roman Catholic Mass. Yeah, because I think I will enjoy that.
We'll carpool to Holy Martyrs in Murrieta one of these days.
Yeah,
I just didn't want to miss the opportunity. I say Latin Mass. We'll see what happens. Maybe the triune God will manifest Himself to you.
No, don't get me wrong though. I enjoyed the experience because that was my first time.
Yeah.
I was expecting to like this. I do like those dead languages, right?
Sure.
So because I studied Greek and stuff like that, and so I enjoyed those kind of stuff. But yeah, for whatever reason, it didn't turn out like that as I expected. At least my reaction, not the Mass, but it's my reaction to it that I find it a little puzzling because I was expecting to be captivated by it.
Yeah. It's possibly more distracting at that point because you're just thinking, I don't understand. This is an hour where I'm not understanding a single word anybody's saying here, other than maybe Kyrie eleison for the Greek part of it, right? So it's totally understandable. I mean, like I said, it's the same thing for me. I probably shouldn't have given you the missalette, right? Because I was like, oh, follow along the Latin, like that gives you any more. Like that gives more.
That was good because I was able to read the English translation.
Yeah.
Right, and then that's why I said probably if it was in English, it might have a different impact on me. Yeah.
No, definitely the Ordinariate Mass is is it all entirely in English, so it would have been the same. So the symbolism translates, it's still the same. The priest is still not facing you, he's still facing the altar in the East language. I mean, all of these symbols, I mean, I could just, go down to the ones that I'm aware of, obviously and it just seems weird, right? So kind of like what the critique was earlier, is like, it doesn't make sense. Like, what's the value of the priest facing the altar and not facing the people?
Mhm.
There's like deep theology about it, and Ratzinger talked about it in one of his books, Spirit of the Liturgy, where the earliest traditions of the liturgy were, Christians gathering, before the sun came up to have this Eucharistic feast. And so what they would do is they would wait for just before the sun were to rise, and the window would always be window would face east. They would open the window, the sun comes in through, and that's when they would have the consecration, right? So the sun, not that they were worshiping the sun, but the sun was a symbol of the true sun, the Son of God rising from the east, right? And that comes from biblical language too, rising from the east. So that's why all the altars always faced east as much as possible. If your structure allowed for it and you built it, you would always face east. Now, it seems like a trivial thing. Why face east? But then the priest also is not just a presider of a community. He is offering sacrifice. And so his focus is not on us or entertaining the people. His focus is on offering the sacrifice on the altar. Which is Christ, right? So I mean, the bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Christ and all that stuff. So all those little things that seem trivial really do have a meaning, and it does. Of course, I can't do it justice now to talk about all those things. Like, why are there 3 priests up there? There were 3 priests up there. Actually, there was 2 priests and 1 stand-in, a deacon and a subdeacon. But all of their functions have symbolic meaning, and it's not obvious. Whereas if you go to the English Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass, all the functions seem obvious. They're very practical. The young kids there that are just, wearing the vestments, their practical purpose is to hand the wine, and wash the hand of the priest. They're practical functions. You don't need to have a lot of education to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. But when you go to the Latin Mass, everything is incomprehensible. You have to be taught what those functions are and what those ceremonials are. So yeah, no, I don't take it as an offense or as a critique necessarily, although it is a critique. I don't take it negatively.
I think any kind of intellectual endeavor, right, and I'll call it that, right, requires some kind of conditioning, right? And if worship of that sort is some kind of an intellectual endeavor, right, then it needs some conditioning. And so my problem was, I thought I was conditioned enough to appreciate it.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, I realized that I was not conditioned enough to somehow appreciate it as much as I was expecting.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, I was thinking, I do philosophy. Yeah, if I go there, right, I think I will readily appreciate it because it has to appeal to my intellect, right? But to my surprise, it was not, right? Because my experience is that the English Mass seemed to actually appeal to my intellect. So it was some kind of a cherished intellectual kind of experience that I had with the English Mass. The Anglican, right? The Lutheran and the Catholic one.
Sure.
Right? So I don't know. Like what I said, intellectual endeavors of that sort might require, deep, profound conditioning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing when you say you were expecting more of an intellectual appeal. In contrast to what you also said earlier, where you thought you had said that you would assume sort of a more what do you say, a more mature faith would be interested in something like the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
And I don't know. My first thought is, my tendency to be egotistical. I was like, oh yeah, of course you're right, because I'm a very smart guy myself. Of course I love the Latin Mass. But I thought about it and I thought maybe it's the opposite, because again, this is this was the mass of the poor people. This is the mass of the masses, right? The mass was designed for the common people. So when you have the Latin Vulgate, it's called the Vulgate because it was the vulgar tongue. The Latin was actually the vernacular of the day. It was the common language of the people, right? Whereas English is now. And so it was supposed to appeal on a more emotional, maybe even some might argue that maybe intellect could be a barrier to entering into the mysteries of the Catholic Mass. I don't know if I'm making sense, because a lot of it is sensorial: the smoke, the incense, the bells, the chanting, and the things like that. They're all senses, and how typical Catholic churches traditionally were constructed. You had a lot of stained glass windows and statuary to kind of not distract you necessarily, but if the Latin was a little too much, you could glance over and you could see the crucifixion of Christ or something like that. And then there's Saint John, there's Our Lady, Saint Mary, all the and then you can kind of contemplate that kind of mystery and not so much be bored, if you will, if that's what you tended to be in the Latin. Is that you have all these things that appeal to your senses and maybe your emotions and your sense of mystery, like this attraction to mystery that I don't know if that's making sense. Does that make sense? So yeah, maybe that's why the English is more appealing to an intellectual, whereas the Latin is more maybe appealing to someone who's more maybe even emotional. I don't know if you would say that, but I don't know. I don't know the answer yet, but it's certainly something I have to think about more. So
don't take that as a. I don't even know if I should. That should be taken as a critique, but that's just my impressions, I guess.
Oh no, it's fine. It's all valid. Their impressions. It's something to think about. I can't think about it if I don't hear it expressed. Your true thoughts about it. So, lastly, I have this question. The Lutheran tradition is of course rooted in the earliest days of its history in the Roman tradition. Luther being a monk of the Catholic Church for a time. Can you maybe summarize different schools of thought as far as you're aware on perspectives on liturgy and worship from the Lutheran tradition? Is there a spectrum, and where are what divides really the whole spectrum of high church, low church Lutheranism when they're all rooted in Luther?
I'm not an expert on Lutheranism, even though our church is some kind of a Lutheran pietist tradition, right? But it's actually, in a sense, it went against Lutheranism in some sense, right? The pietist tradition in Germany was a reaction against Lutheran, the Lutheran Church as the state church of Germany during that time. But I think in Lutheranism, there's a huge spectrum that you might find. It's a similar spectrum that you will find in the Roman Catholic Church. So I think the high Lutheran tradition might be very similar to the high mass in the Catholic Church, or probably not the high mass, because Luther likes the vernacular language, right? Rather than Latin. But I think the traditions are very similar. Sacraments, right? The sacramentality, right, of some of the practices of the church. So that's very much similar to the Catholic Church. It is liturgical in the sense that they seem to value, Lutherans seem to value those sacraments in ways that are very similar to the Roman Catholic Church, right? So when you look at the Eucharist, so this is what's different between Luther and Calvin. right? So Calvin thought that all of these rituals are just all about commemorating things of the past, right? But for Lutheranism, many of these sacraments really do have substantive value, other than just simply commemorating something. So again, even when you look at the belief in Christ being in and with and under, right? The sacrament, the elements for the Eucharist. So that sounds like very much like similar to Catholicism, even though there are some nuances.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's closer to the Roman Catholic Church than to Calvin's idea of the communion as merely a commemoration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and there's a spectrum when it comes to worship. There's you have Lutherans that are very, very liturgical, but there are Lutherans who are into contemporary music, right? Worship music. Although the difference here, when it comes to when you look at Lutherans and the Evangelicals, for example, right? Only very few Lutherans find contemporary music appealing. So that means I think there's still a majority of Lutherans who are really into the liturgies, like the liturgical aspects of the church. Yeah. So in a way, probably Lutheranism is more like in the middle of Catholicism and Calvinism, but leaning towards the Catholicism part, or the Catholic part of the spectrum.
Right.
At least that's how I think about liturgies from the standpoint of the Lutheran Church.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I made sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. As you were speaking, actually, I was thinking, okay, I have a new theory. Why you weren't converted by the traditional Latin Mass. The interesting thing, and this is part of sort of what I do with the Latin Mass, is like really draw the distinctions with the Novus, the new Mass, and the Old Mass. If you look at the history of how they created the new Mass, there was explicitly an intention to make the Mass more Protestant and less Catholic.
Okay.
So, and I'm not going to share the quotes here because it's outside of the scope of what we're necessarily talking about here. But if you look at the 1969 instruction for the new Mass, the new Mass came out in 1970. The instruction that came out, that was published, defined what the Mass was. And if you look at the Tridentine definition, I'm just paraphrasing here, the traditional view of the Mass is it's the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, who gave up his life, he shed his blood for the sanctification, the justification, sanctification of the elect, right? Not the elect predestined before time, but anyone who is saved by the blood of Christ, right? That same sacrifice of Calvary is the same sacrifice that is in an unbloody way represented, let's put it that way, on the altar of the Mass. So the event of the cross and the event of each particular Mass throughout the ages is the same event, right? And it sounds mystical, it sounds magical, and all this other stuff. And so our participation is receiving the body and blood of Christ at communion, right? So that's the Tridentine view of the liturgy. It's actually the classical view. It's not just the Tridentine view. But what you have at the new Mass is community coming together to commemorate the Last Supper and to receive the Eucharist in sort of this communal activity. It's about the people coming together, presided over by the priest. And Christ is not just focused on altar, Christ is present in the presider, Christ is present in the word by the scriptures, Christ is present in the people, and Christ is present in the Eucharist, of course. But the emphasis is clearly shifted in the new Mass to a more communal aspect of liturgy rather than sacrificial. So I think in that sense, perhaps because of maybe your Eucharistic theology, if I could even call it that, right? Because it's a commemorative perspective that you hold rather than a sacrificial one, that maybe that in itself appeals to you, because that's essentially what the new Mass is. It's a, I don't use this as a negative way. To Catholic ears, it sounds negative, but the new Mass is a Protestantized version of the Catholic Mass, because they actually had 6 Protestant ministers that were advisors to the constructor, those who constructed the new Mass. So that's a long way of saying I think that I understand why it's appealing more so. I don't know. Do you have any? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think I keep on going back to this concept of whether something is necessary, right? Yeah. So the repetitiveness of the reenactment, right, of God's sacrificial offering that we find in the Mass, I think I'm always going back to what's stopping me from making a move forward, right? Is always that seeming unnecessariness of the rituals. So this might be, I'm not a Calvinist, but this might be some kind of a Calvinistic kind of influence on me, right? But it might just be, the pietistic part of me that is always drawn to simplicity, right? The kind of church that you find in the Book of Acts, for example. They seem to be simple, gathering in houses, at least some of them, right? Singing hymns and listening to the teaching of the word. And that was it. That was the so there's something about the repetitiveness of the reenactments of God's sacrificial offering that seems to make the process a bit more or much more extravagant looking, right? It's some kind of a pageantry that is closer to what ancient religions do. I don't know if I'm making sense when I say.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's in some way it's what the Jews did, right?
Yeah.
I mean, assuming their vestments are similar to how they were depicted in Mel Gibson's The Passion, right? They had very ceremonial garb, and so I guess then the question would be then, at what point was it explicitly the case that was a thing of the past, right? So, or was it, or did it transfer over? And even if it did transfer over, what would be the impetus to start shaving away? I mean, I suppose on the tail end of our Galatians study, one could make perhaps the argument, if St. Paul is saying, get rid of your ceremonials, right? That stuff is old religion. That stuff is old hat. This is a new religion. This is a religion of grace. Investments, get rid of that stuff. Get rid of your smoke and mirrors and stuff like that. So, I can appreciate an argument made from that perspective.
Yeah, probably that's the kind of argument that I have in mind. It's probably more, very much closer to Paul's argument here. But I think I'm also similar with Paul, where, Paul did not really discourage the Jews from doing whatever rituals they were doing for themselves. He was simply objecting to them, requiring the Gentiles to do exactly the same thing, or overburdening the Gentiles, right? So for me, I didn't leave that Latin Mass critical of it, right? I was not actually even in my mind, I was not even trying to criticize it. But it's more like I don't think it's a criticism to ask, why is that even necessary? It's just,
Oh, sure, sure.
yeah, it was just some kind of a, yeah, it's not, I don't want to call it a criticism, because I don't think it was. I was not objecting to it,
Sure, sure.
right? I really do think that it has some kind of aesthetic value,
Yeah.
right? It's just, I'm just wondering though, time, why do I have to do it?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
no, it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. I can imagine even someone who's new to Christianity saying, "Why do I even have to go to church on Sunday?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Or something like that, right? As simple as that. It's why do I have to do anything? I
Yeah.
just read my Bible under a tree. And
Yeah.
I've actually encountered Christians who actually believe that, right? Like, why I don't go to church? I don't need to. I have the Word of God here.
Yeah.
I don't need to worship in community, even though you see it in the Bible. They came together on the Lord's Day. What day is that? It's Sunday, we would say, right? It's the new Sabbath. But okay. Well, do you have? This could easily go on to 3 hours. We usually have 3-4 hour conversations. So,
Yeah.
do you have any final thoughts or anything like that?
I'm good. I just hope that your viewers will not see it as me trying to criticize. I'm just naturally sound like I'm criticizing things, right? So that's
Sure.
not my intention.
I
But I
don't
think
think
it
so.
was. I thought it was like what I said. I don't think I don't think I don't even want to say I disliked it. It's just not. It's not even a dislike. It was just the question of its importance or necessity. Why do I have to do it like that?
Yeah.
Right? That just kept on entering my mind, right, when I was there. So yeah, and again, honestly, I'm actually just saying this, that I don't dislike it. I don't even think I was critical of it, because if I was critical of it, my wife would have heard me saying something against it. But I was not. I didn't say anything against it. So I don't think I was critical. I was just wondering why I did not react the way I was expecting to react. So it's probably has to do a lot with conditioning. Just like, when you said the way you reacted to it was also negative in the beginning. But the more you condition yourself, right? I'm assuming you learn to appreciate it. That's probably what people needs to do, right? Like what I said, I think anything that has some kind of an intellectual element to it, it requires some kind of conditioning.
Yeah.
In order for you to appreciate it, right? Because that seems to be my struggle also as a preacher. As a preacher with some philosophy background, I have a tendency to preach most of the time things that are a little too deep for a lot of people who go to church, right? And I always tell people, I'm probably more like an acquired taste, right? You just have to, you have to come back the second time, the third time, in order to appreciate what it is that I'm saying. But that's probably the same thing there, right? So if I come back over and over again, right, I might have a deeper appreciation of it, right? So it's one of those things that are probably not appealing at first view.
Sure.
So that's probably one of those things that you don't really, it's not love at first sight.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Average. I think it averages out, right? So,
Uh-huh.
I probably shouldn't judge any experience I have at any Protestant ceremony I've attended just by the one, even though we naturally do that because you're only visiting one time. It's not like you're going several times. But I mean, my first interaction with you was as a philosophy professor, so I didn't have any preconceived expectations when I went to your service. I was actually expecting sort of an intellectual approach and not sort of a sermon. I know you call it sermons, but I feel it was more like a philosophy a lecture to me than it was necessarily a sermon. A sermon in the sense that it's calling for us to action as Christians. A sermon in that sense, but the approach was so different from any kind of other evangelical church I've ever been to. So because a lot of it is it's about the emotional interaction with the crowd, right? So I've been to the Rock Christian Church a couple of times years ago, and a lot of it is about being amped up by the music and standing and clapping and stuff like that. And then the preaching is a lot of the amen stuff, and then you do that kind of thing, and then you're energized. But it's a different feel to it, and it never appealed to me. That stuff doesn't appeal to me. It obviously appeals to thousands of people because that's a mega church, but it doesn't appeal to me. So I totally appreciate the feedback that you have as far as the Latin Mass. I'm not necessarily surprised, although I did read your body language a little different. I thought, wow, he thinks this is amazing. He's so excited. He was like looking and checking that out, and I was like, oh, he's so excited about this. So
I have like those criticism in my head, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Instead, it was like, oh, this architecture, I could preach here, or what is that business? What's this? All this, I was totally misinterpreting the cues, but that's good. It's good to get that feedback, because it can't be too different from new Catholics coming in that have that same thought, but they don't share it because they don't want to upset, whatever. And I don't get upset about those things, because we're human. We are relational creatures, and sometimes we have our first impression thoughts, and if they don't get addressed, then we just keep them on the back burner all this time. And maybe it's something that could actually be a impetus for change. Right. So if there is this sense that this new person is not going to totally not going to understand this Latin stuff, we should really what we call catechize. We should instruct them before they go. That way they're not distracted with their initial reactions, but they understand already, oh, okay, it is going to be in Latin. This is the rationale for the Latin and the silence and all this other stuff. So then they could just appreciate it perhaps as a work of maybe art and less a work of like comprehension. So anyway, well, thank you for your feedback. I don't know what time frame we're having now, but
that's fine. I hope I didn't mess it up.
No, it's fine. I only have 2 viewers. It's fine. It's myself, and then maybe when you view it later on. So, but I already have actually some commentators. So for a Filipino friend of mine, Richard Friend, who's appreciating your feedback. So he thanks you for and you'll see his comments there when I tag you.
Okay.
So if nothing else, well, thank you for joining me in this in reaction to the Latin Mass, and maybe at some future time we can maybe do that Anglican Catholic Mass.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I wanted to see that one in Murrieta for sure.
Yeah, I know it's just quite a drive, so we have to plan it carefully, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fine.
And maybe because they have actually different grades of Mass. So you have what's called the Solemn High Mass, which is what you saw. And then they have a sung Mass, a Missa Cantata, which is just the priest, but sung. It's simpler, less ceremonials. But then they have what's called sort of a low Mass, which is less music, less ceremonials, and it's a lot of more verbalizing back and forth. But since it's in English, it doesn't really matter. But it's more of a simple form of the liturgy.
Yeah.
So, all right. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will end the broadcast, or at least I'll end the recording, and if we could chat a little bit more if you like before I go.